Okay.
Okay,
Right.
so now we have Samita Silvera, and she will have 20 minutes, and as with the other speakers, I'll give you a 3-minute warning and a 1-minute warning.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can bioenergy be used as a catalyst for a different logic in the economy? My name is Samita Silvera. I'm professor in energy systems planning at KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology, and I lead a group called Energy and Climate Studies, where we work on energy transitions and transdisciplinary research with a focus on energy, climate change, and sustainable development. And I guess I stay for the A on the action because we work very much close to action, close to the implementation. And there's good news, perhaps it's a softer talk just before the coffee break rather than a technical one. I'm also part of a group that we are creating in KTH across the whole university on circular economy. And that fits very well with the type of work that we are doing on decoupling development from resource depletion, reducing inequality. I work a lot on development issues, rethink the industrial and the economic logic, which is in the core of the idea of circular economy. And that will require that we have different planning process, also the way of designing policies and of going away from pure sectoral policies and to catalyze then on the linkages and synergies that we can have by acting on the local level, but having a global impact, for example, on climate change mitigation and the sustainable development goals overall. As we know, bioenergy is the largest renewable energy in the world. And it's true that a large part of it is used in a traditional way, but that also is one of the things about the potential here that we have to harness bioenergy. Yet it is not being harnessed in the same way as other renewables. And we have had in the last 2 decades a very strong development for bioenergy. We're looking very much on crops, for example, potential crops for utilizing for growing biomass for bioenergy production, particularly biofuels. These are some of the examples. And an interesting aspect to remember is that the largest biomass production is in the tropical region where many developing countries are, then bringing there a large potential. But we haven't been able to fully use that. And this is a view from the IPCC in 2001 on what you can achieve in terms of net primary energy from crops and plantations. But that is an interesting idea, but it is still a little bit the idea that you will use the crop or you use the biomass for a single purpose. And that single purpose is seldom only energy. We know that bioenergy can contribute to energy security. I'll give you some examples on that, and the sustainability and the economic development. And yet we are so threatened by it. And a large part of the constraints to bioenergy now, we have seen a reduction in the growth of the use of bioenergy. Relates to land competition. There is a real fear about the threat to natural habitats, for example, the case of Indonesia, which I'm going to talk about. The threat to food security is something people are really busy about. Again, in the linear thinking that, okay, if we have used the crops for bioenergy, then we will not have the space for the food. So it's either or, when actually we have plenty of examples already that it's both. And of course, scale matters. In any case, I'm going to give you some examples about the different scales, and this is one of the potentials. One of the interesting things I find about bioenergy is this multiple opportunities at different scales. And our approach in the study that we do, the studies we do and the projects we develop, is that the energy systems, they must be understood in the context of the demand of products and services that we have around. So we have worked in other areas, not necessarily only bioenergy, but we have worked with the whole spectrum of bioenergy. And what we are trying to do now is to see if we can find some common ground to guide us in a conceptual way to motivate bioenergy in a different way than we have done. Not only bioenergy, but biomass utilization for multiple purposes. Yeah? And that's why you need to understand the context, to contextualize much more than you need if you're doing solar than if you're doing wind. Of course, you need contextualization in any case. You want to have wind mills where there is wind. But when we talk about the implications in terms of the multiple implications and ramifications of the effects you have in bioenergy, they are much more complex and multiple and affect people in different way. And as a result, we also have, because of this linear approach that we have had, we have a lot of externalities. And this is incredible because also, I mean, now moving from thinking bioenergy as a crop related energy to the actual biomass resource that you have. Yeah? And this is what you see in many places. And if not like that, in a more organized way, with landfilling of everything, including the US, which is largely landfilling still. Yeah? In Sweden, we only landfill maximum 1% now of that. We are doing energy harnessing of the residues. It's an interesting solution, but it's an interim solution because just burning all the residues is not the ultimate either. That's where the circular economy comes in, where you're actually going to think different paths for different products and different separation. We have today a separation of about 30 different items, and we are going to have in the next few years 35 in the European context, not all countries, but anyway in Sweden. And we will going to create different paths for recycling and for regaining the value of the products and the materials. So we want to go away from this. And as I said, we want to look at if we can create tools that can analyze the impact of bioenergy, using then the bioenergy as a catalyst. Why bioenergy as a catalyst? Well, because we have already proven technologies, we have already proven inception of bioenergy at different scales in different countries, in different parts of the world, and then you can actually harness that in other places where it's still the potential sometimes recognized but yet not happening many times because transaction costs are large, and create then frameworks to facilitate. So if we think of the sizing, how to size the bioenergy potential, one can think that with this logic here, some countries have been quite successful. I would say Sweden and Brazil have created systems for harnessing bioenergy in large scale. So that you at the same time that you create policies to facilitate the inception, you talk to different stakeholders at the different stages, like in Brazil with the agriculture, in Sweden with the forestry, and then you create the linkages along the way and actually implement. For Sweden, the marriage was between forestry and bioenergy. In those days, bioenergy for electricity from biomass could not compete. Sweden had a lot of nuclear power and hydropower available, and there was no way electricity from biomass would compete. But the bioenergy came in the heating market. So it was a separate market, completely separate market with heating systems expanding all over the country. Today, all multifamily houses, almost all multifamily houses in the cities of Sweden are connected with district heating. And a lot of that, most of it, is filled with biomass. So that marriage has worked, and the heat and power has come lately, more in the past 10 years with the green certificates, then giving a premium for renewables that then allowed bioenergy was the first one to pass the threshold and come in as a major source of biomass. So both Brazil and Sweden today have 1/4 of their energy from biomass. In Brazil, the marriage was with the agriculture and marriage with the sugarcane industry. It was an industry that was experienced a lot of problems in the 70s. The oil prices were high. The sugar prices were very low. And that sector needed a real boost. They saw a great opportunity. The government orchestrated this with the car industry, and the rest is history. We have a large penetration. You heard in the first presentation already about the Brazilian case. So both countries are now working in the next stage. And in Sweden, we have, as I said, a very fantastic, the Bioenergy group likes to show this very much, the Bioenergy Association, that actually bioenergy expansion in Sweden went hand in hand with a lot of GDP growth and reduction of climate greenhouse gas emissions. And Sweden, but it's not uncontroversial. In Sweden now, where we're talking about expanding further this, strengthening the cooperation with the forestry industry, now comes everybody, oh, wait a minute. The forests are, and we have more standing forests in Sweden today than we had 10, 20 years ago. So there is more forest, more biomass. But the problem is that people compare sometimes apples and pears, and you have this standing forest not necessarily in the commercial area of forestry. So there is a lot of discussion. Plus, the pulp and paper industry always have seen this marriage with half-heart, because they see that they are competing for similar resources. It's a great combination, but just to a certain extent. Yeah. So moving to the next steps will be very complex. Another thing that Sweden has tried to do is to do the second generation with extracting ethanol from wood. But that has proven very difficult to make cost efficient. So this is still a struggle. In the Brazilian case, the marriage was great for the agricultural side. There is a lot of discussion internationally. It took quite a while to get people to accept that it was a quite interesting solution in many respects. There are other issues raised, of course, and it was raised earlier today. But it's an interesting thing is that with the pressure, the international pressure on the Brazilian sugar ethanol industry, a lot has happened in terms of the understanding of the issues of sustainability, in terms of moving now into the second generation as well, in terms of looking at the further ramifications of, for example, bioplastic production, which is already a reality. So the industry has had many ramifications with quite interesting development in the country. But this, as I said, was still, I think, is... so now Sweden and Brazil, which are the two examples I gave you, are moving into trying to understand, okay, how can we plug this into the idea of more circularity and sustainability, etc. In this work that we are trying to do, then I'm pulling together a lot of work we have done in bioenergy in different countries and looking at how we can address the circularity aspect, because it goes a little bit like, okay, now we are in the previous graph that as I showed you in the previous figure, we're thinking of, okay, now we have all these emissions, they are captured again as the biomass grows, then you have a zero emission. But what if we do negative emissions? So in Stockholm, for example, where we have the largest district heating system in the world, we are actually seriously talking about carbon capture and storage, led by the district heating company. And that would make then the bioenergy solution a negative sink for greenhouse gas emissions. But again, it's a little bit still the linear, if we follow me, because we are still thinking, okay, at the end of the pipe, we have something here that we don't like, and then we create something to deal with the end of the pipe. So to me, it sounds a little bit like the early days of when we started talking about environmental impacts. We put filters, this is the first step, but we need to actually work in the circularity. So we have the resources here from agriculture, forest, cattle, agriculture, etc. And we have the products, food. We used it for food, fodder, packaging, fuels, construction, etc. And then we have this residual food waste. We have other things there at the end that we don't like. We have emissions, etc. What we have seen in the bioenergy debate is that we have more and more gone to discuss the source, which is good. But when we discuss, for example, indirect land use, which has become a big issue with the sugarcane, the debate. Indirect land use meaning that, okay, you are planting here, but you are displacing crops that are going elsewhere. Because the first debate on the ethanol in Brazil was that, oh, you're cutting for the Amazon forest. But the production of sugarcane is actually in a completely different region, 5,000 miles away from the Amazon. But then they said, okay, but then you're displacing crops that are moving to another place. So again, this is a little bit linear. It makes sense to a certain extent, but it's still, again, you displace, you put something else because there is a trade-off, yeah, where you actually could have both. You could even count land twice. For example, in Brazil, where we grow soya beans, in between the crop, you have the small crop, as they call it. And the small crop, you could have the small crop as a very oil-producing plant, so in the same land. The soya is also, but you could have yet another one that is beyond the soya. Okay, so then you take that, and we want to explore how you actually, beyond going efficiency improvements, because you can create, of course, efficiency along all the way. And we still need to work on that in terms of yields and in terms of productivity, etc. But we can also think of what we're actually getting from these different steps and how we can actually reconnect and create more circularity. This could be very disruptive. In this district heating system in Stockholm, for example, we are very much heated with incineration, with a lot of waste being incinerated and providing heat. So it's okay. We even import a lot of waste and incinerate. So it's okay as an in-between interim solution. But as we start separating much more, as we start doing chemical recycling, for example, of plastics, etc., then we will come into a completely different solution. Great. So I will have to move a little bit fast in my comments, in my approach. So I couldn't let go, give an example at very small scale, how bioenergy can change life of people. And of course, biomass this is in Bangladesh, and on the top you have the typical cooking. This is dung that is put in these sticks here and dried so that it's easier afterwards to cook. But this lady here, she is very entrepreneurial. And she has a farm producing eggs, etc. And she takes the residues, produces biogas, sell to the neighborhood, and she still has to deal with the wastewater here. They're looking for a solution. So it can be done, and they did this all on their own. So it can be done in so many different scales with technologies, very simple, that we know. Another connection to that, also in Bangladesh, is that when we're thinking the solution, we could use the biogas for producing energy, yes, but then we calculated this solution that we had 8 cows could do this, and we would produce another thing. We put a module to clean water. In Bangladesh, most of the water is full of arsenic, so clean water is very precious. And so we produce the energy and the clean water. And in this way, the economy of the whole project becomes quite different. And we use the low heat in the biogas production to actually clean the water. So it's, instead of just losing it, we can use it for another purpose. So this is a project that we are doing now in Brazil. Now this is in the urban context, and the city of Curitiba has a fantastic program for food production in the urban area, in the suburban areas of Curitiba. And we are now plugging in to discuss a different model that plugs new value for the local producers using the biomass and also for the waste from the markets, etc. So this is an ongoing project. And finally, I have 1 more minute, 1.5, and I'll show you this. This is a big project we had in Indonesia. And as you know, the palm oil industry has become one of the most controversial in the whole world. And as I said, we like to go into the place and say, what's going on here and how can it be changed? Europe has basically banned all palm oil, which is very sad in a way because the banning will not solve the problem. And why not? Well, this is the plan of Indonesia to increase the use of bioenergy. They have very advanced plans. Some of it has been implemented, some not. But the most important is to think that this is a major part of the economy. It's a very big part of the economy. It's just letting it go away will not solve the problem. And it will have impacts for us in the world as well. So just the banning of the imports will not solve the problem. And here we have worked with the different sectors. As you see here, there are so many jobs being created. There's so many different levels and it is an issue. Of course, the deforestation is an issue. But we have done a lot of scenarios about what can we do if we stop the deforestation. Can we meet the targets? And yes, we can. But there are many issues, like, for example, going on the land where you can see that what we count as land for different policies require land. So land for agriculture, land for biofuels, land for climate policy, which is forest related, etc. And we found out that, okay, in all these plans, we have 29 million hectares allocated for the biofuel policy, but we actually only have 20 if we consider the other policies. Yeah? So this policy coherence is very important. I'll pass this fast. And then we looked at the residues, what is not happening, because the industry is focused on the commodity, the palm oil. And along the way, there is so much that can be done. And we looked and we did some scenarios that, I'm going to pass this fast, and we can see that we connected here with using the residues to provide electricity. A lot of people don't have electricity in Indonesia. The opportunity is enormous to connect with the SDGs, with the electrification program, and it's not happening because of this linear thinking of the focus on the commodity. Anyway, so my last slide. The idea here is that we're trying to pull together, I just gave you a few examples very briefly of areas we have worked in different scales and in different ways where bioenergy comes and plays a role. And the idea is to then stop thinking in a linear way, start thinking in with a circular approach, and of course circular approach for material and energy, but the circularity of energy is different than the circularity of material. I don't have to explain that to you, but quite often I have to explain this in many contexts because the energy cannot be created. And from we're going to a transdisciplinary approach, meaning that we work also with the private sector on the ground and the municipalities to co-create the solution, whatever that solution may be, that fits, that works. But from the point of view of the research, our side, we want to try and find a common ground, a common denominator that we can start communicating better with both policymakers and to show the benefits that we can get and at what scales and adapt it to what reality we have on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see if we have any questions. I've got one, actually.
Yes, you should go ahead, 'cause I've been following the question.
You have done well, Buzz. Yes, so taking a step back, we often see that, of course, with wind, there needs to be wind. With sun, there needs to be sun. But there's not a lot of thought given to the local context. In this case, you've painted a very clear picture that, that in order to optimize the benefits, the potential of bioenergy, you really need to think very hard about the local context. Now, as we heard, I think many people see that as, so depending upon whether the people see it as glasses half empty or glasses half full, I think your picture is a glasses half full. How do we talk to people who see that as glasses half empty? They just want to be able to put up a windmill, put up a solar panel, and not have to think about the local context.
Yeah. I think this is actually the point. This is you're at the core of the question. How can we actually convey the message in a good way? Because at the end of the day, the solar panel also will give us a problem in a few years. We have to deal with the circularity of that too. And we are not even kind of really having a debate on it. Yeah? So the circularity is there for all industries. But here, I think there is an inherent circularity in the issue of bioenergy that we could actually capitalize on, and we are not capitalizing. And I think that we as experts need to find ways to convey that in a better way. I'm not sure I answered your question, but I guess this is the core of the question.
This is the core, yes. Please.
Yeah, I would like to suggest, if I might, that I reflect in relation to this question that most of humanity has decided that we treat air and water as collective resources, and even that we treat climate as collective resource, and we don't have the right to just do anything we want with it. And in my view, the critical, the cross-cutting transformation that has to happen is to treat land the same way. Right now, in the world, it's like if you own a piece of land, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Whereas if you are, discharging into a river or a smokestack, you can't. And I think once we do that, bioenergy can function really well within that context. All the objections, all the half-full comments about bioenergy are related to the idea that we're going to make land use decisions as if we don't care about all the connections. Once you care about all the connections and have intent, you start optimizing the good rather than having to live with the bad. And so I think that, I don't know that we're that close to it, but I think that's what really has to happen, is to take collective responsibility for land and our actions on land.
Yeah, I think the land issue is really important, but also we actually see a different treatment of land in different countries. It varies quite a bit. And you have the classification. In the case of Indonesia, they have two classifications, so it's very blurred, it's very difficult to follow the classification. And so I think a good classification is one of the things we found, that a good classification would help very much to show what is possible, what is not. They do have, a kind of definition of, okay, this is the type of land and what you can do with it or not do with it, but it's so blurred that it actually doesn't work. And in the urban areas, we have much more control of the land, but it's in a different way, not in the context that is the most relevant, perhaps, for this discussion on bioenergy. But the issue is that bioenergy is so diverse. It's not like wind and solar. Of course, they are diverse in certain ways too. But bioenergy is more diverse, I would say, because you have the sources are so multiple, and the contexts are so multiple. I must even say an example of, I was in Copenhagen in the COP once, and then we were discussing clean development mechanism projects, and there was a lady there from an island in the Pacific, and she spoke a language that nobody understood, but there was a translator. Only one person could understand and translate. And then she suddenly said, okay, there is the CDM project, and I'm here because you are taking away our livelihood. And what was that? Well, it was a mountain like the one I showed of garbage, yeah? And everybody was silent because, I mean, you want the situation to be better, but you cannot just come and find a solution that does not take into account that there were thousands of people living on the garbage. And it's terrible. It's not something you want to see. But it is like coming with a project that does not look at what is on the ground and how you can actually bring along the inclusion of those people in participating in the revolution. And another thing that on the bioenergy is coming very much is on the food issue and the food waste and etc. that we have very, very strong campaigns, including the Pope has engaged now. And this is very important because you have large populations and increasing populations, and connecting the food issue, which is what we are somehow trying to do in Curitiba. Yeah? But we have a work to do with the policymakers, I think, to explain what bioenergy is. And most places, you know, people say, if I say I work with bioenergy, most people say, what is that? Yeah, so people don't know what that is. But climate change, people know. So maybe we can make a connection.
So let's thank our speaker, and let's thank all the speakers.
Thank you.
All right, and I'm sure you have lots of questions left, which we can take over at the coffee. And please, everybody, come back in 20 minutes. Thank you all.